I began to feel like I was losing my identity, that the person I called Clay, the person who put me in this place, the person who volunteered to go into this prison because it was a prison to me, it is still a prison to me. I began to feel that identity, the person that I was, had decided to go to prison, was distant from me. It was remote until I finally wasn't that. I was 416. I was really my number. I'm Skye.
I'm Katie.
And I'm John.
And welcome to Histories, Mysteries, and Conspiracies. I was about to, skip the whole intro. This week, I am talking about the dark history of the Stanford Prison Experiment. Waiting for a reaction, and there was zero.
I've never heard of it.
You've never even heard of it?
I've heard of it, but I don't know anything about it.
Honestly, maybe once you get into it, I'll know the situation.
So the thing about this experiment is that everything you look up is you probably learned about it in your intro psychology class. I never did. I have a degree in psychology. Never learned it in one of my classes. But we learned about other similar studies, which I'll talk about at the end. But this study is just a crazy psychological experiment. Now, all of my information is from the Stanford Prison Experiments website, which is prisonexp.org, and it is run by actually the professor who conducted the experiment. So he's the one who built the website. His name is Philip Zimbardo. Now, this experiment happened in August of 1971.
Okay.
And it
probably before ethics were a thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
I have a feeling I know where this is going.
So it was conducted by Philip Zimbardo and some graduate students from Stanford University. And there's different parts of this, so I'm going to take it step by step.
Sure.
The first part is the setup. So what they did is they ran a newspaper ad asking for male college students to apply for a psychological study, which would study the effects of prison life. Now, they would be given $15 a day for the study, which today is just under $100. They received over 70 applications, and so they did a thorough testing of all the applicants. They did an interview process test because they wanted to make sure they were psychologically sound, they were physically, mentally healthy, and that they had no crime or drug abuse or any mental illness, anything like that.
Okay.
So they tried to get them as normal, healthy people as they could. So they ended up with 24 at the end. Half of them were randomly assigned to be guards. The other half were randomly assigned to be prisoners.
Oh, yes. I know this experiment. There's my master's in social work coming out.
And there were no difference between the groups, supposedly, but they never say how that was measured. So,
well, also, how can you measure that?
I mean, if you're looking at specific variables, so that was one thing. There's a lot of flack for this because they're this wasn't even a good experiment.
Right.
They don't even what the variables were was super unclear.
Gotcha. So did they look at race, socioeconomic status? Because I feel like that's going to make a lot of big difference.
White males who were middle class attended Stanford University.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
There was that.
So actually, that's not bad.
So they had that. Yeah, there was the control there, but that was it. So when they're recruiting the studies, Zimbardo talked to several ex-convicts who had been imprisoned for some of them for 14 years, some of them less, and a bunch of correctional officers to try to get an idea of how to organize and run this prison. And they built the prison in the basement of a psych building at Stanford, and they had 3 cells, a room for guards, a closet that was used as solitary isolation, which was 2 feet by 2 feet, and then it was just tall enough for them to stand up.
Oh my God.
And yeah, it was dark. And they had the hallway or the corridor, which was the yard, and it was used for eating, exercising, and walking. So it was just a really, really small area anyway. And there was a bathroom at the end of the hall. Now, the doors had steel bars and cell numbers, and there were no clocks anywhere in this prison. So it really, and I don't think there were any windows to the outside either. So it was really just
very
messed with you. Yeah. So you can kind of see here, that's what the prison was. So there's 3 doors. There's a guard. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So now on to the second part. So this is bringing them in. So when they brought in the prisoners for this, they actually had police officers go and basically arrest them and process them. So they went, picked them up, said it was for an armed robbery or something like that. And they were taken to the police station, fingerprinted, had their mugshot taken, done that whole thing. And then they were blindfolded while they were there.
Did they know why they were getting arrested? Did they know this was part of the experiment?
I believe so. Okay. That's never made clear, but I'm pretty sure it was. Okay. I don't think that people were expecting it to be that. I think they were expecting just to walk in and
And just
Here
like
we
be
go.
like, I'm the prisoner. Okay,
Yeah.
let's go. But they did the whole experience. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so they were blindfolded at the police station, and then they were picked up and then brought to the Stanford prison. So once they got to the Stanford prison, they were strip searched and then sprayed down. And they were given a uniform, which included a smock, which was like basically like a dress. They weren't allowed to wear any underwear or anything under the smock. And it had a number, which was like their identification number on the front and back. And then they had to wear a women's stocking over their head because they couldn't shave their heads. So this was supposed to simulate that. And then they had to wear a chain with a lock around the ankle and rubber sandals. So like that was it. And that was all they wore their time there. Oh, and this experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks, ended up lasting 6 days. We'll get to that.
Okay.
So prisoners could only, when they talk to other prisoners, they can only refer to them by their number. And then when guards spoke to them, they only referred to them by their number.
Okay. So dehumanizing a little bit.
Yep.
Okay.
So here's kind of what their getup was, and there's the walk around the foot, and they wore that at all times.
And no skivvies.
It's intense. And this is what the guards looked like.
Ballin'.
So for the guards, they wore khaki uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, so you couldn't see their eyes, and they carried billy clubs, which were actually like real cops' billy clubs.
Oh my gosh.
And for the guards, they were given no training, and they were told, like, you can basically do whatever you want, make whatever rules you want. You just can't harm the prisoners, like physically harm them. So
okay.
that was it. They were warned that, this could get dangerous. They could injure you. You're basically like going to be a real prison guard.
Right.
So they began the study with 9 prisoners and 9 guards, and they had like the other 3 were like backup or on call. And so what they did, they had 3 cells. They put 3 prisoners in each cell, and then they would have 3 guards on duty. And so the guards had 8-hour shifts.
Okay.
So there were 3 8-hour shifts, 3 guards each shift. And then in the cells, they had 3 cots, and like they were super close together. I have a picture here, and they were like, that was all they had room for, were these 3 cots in the cells. Now, I think it doesn't say when specifically it was. I'm assuming it was the first night, but it was like the first instance of direct confrontation between the 2 groups was at 2:30 in the morning. The guards woke up all the prisoners to perform counts, and this actually became something that they did all the time, was doing these counts. Their purpose was to get the prisoners familiar with the numbers, and the guards also used push-ups. So, like, with the counts, they would just yell at them and scream at them, and, like, if they couldn't remember their number, they would be punished, and, yeah. So they would just do that all the time, and it was just kind of to show their power over the prisoners.
So is this something that the guards came up with themselves, or is it something... Okay, all right.
I believe so. It's never really made clear if it was someone else. Okay. So pretty quickly on the second day, the prisoners actually like revolted. And yeah, so
that happened real fast.
So they removed their stocking caps, ripped off their numbers, and they barricaded themselves in their cells by putting their mattresses like against the door. And it was during the night, and so the guards just like didn't know what to do. And the prisoners would like mock the guards. So what they did is the guards, I think it was like once the morning people came, they called the backup guards too, like the 3 that were on call. So there ended up being like 9 guards there. So what they did is they took the fire extinguishers, which were nearby, and just began to spray down the prisoners.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then after that, the guards broke into the cells, stripped the prisoners naked, took their beds out, forced the ringleader of the rebellion into solitary confinement, and then began to harass and intimidate the prisoners.
All within the first 2 days.
Yes.
Okay. That is insane.
The guards came up with this idea of the special privileges cell. So what they would do is that they would take the 3 prisoners least involved, wow, I cannot talk today, in the rebellion, and they put them into this special privileges cell where they were allowed to have all their uniforms back, their beds back, they were allowed to brush their teeth, and actually bathe while the others weren't. And they got to eat better food while the other ones got their food portions cut down.
Oh.
So, because I guess like in their waiver, they said that we might cut down your portions, like it'll still be enough to live. But you're going to be hungry. So.
But you won't die of starvation.
Yeah.
Basically.
Huh. So we're trying to like break down the solidarity among the prisoners. And then just to throw them off, what they would do is take those good prisoners, put them back in the other cells, and then take 3 random of the bad prisoners and throw them into the privileges cell. And I guess the idea behind this was to throw off their groups. So it wasn't like, oh, well, those are the good prisoners and we're the bad prisoners, so we should be against them. It was like, oh, we are all a unit, and then the unit gets broken up.
I kind of get that.
Apparently, that's what they actually do in real prisons.
Wait, really?
So, yeah, I'm going to read this from the website. Our ex-convict consultants later informed us that a similar tactic is used by real guards in real prisons to break prisoner alliances. So, by dividing and conquering in this way, guards promote aggression among inmates, thereby deflecting it from themselves. So, also, this whole rebellion made greater solidarity among the guards. And so this very quickly became like they were living their role, and they filled it all, among all parties. Also, because this happened so early, the guards were like, okay, we need to do a better job. We need to be more aggressive. We need to survey them better and all that stuff.
How do you do, how much more can you do without, like, beating the shit out of them?
Well...
Oh, I think that's coming.
They had going to the bathroom as a privilege, like using an actual toilet. So what they would do is they would give them buckets in their cells, and they could use the bucket to go to the bathroom. And then they would also, another punishment was to make them leave it there. So they wouldn't take it out and empty it, and so that it would just begin to smell bad, and it would just be disgusting, and all this stuff. And the guards were especially tough on the ringleader of the rebellion. So, and I guess apparently that guy was a super heavy smoker, so they really cut down on his, like, I guess they could let them smoke, but they really cut down on how often he could smoke. And they also, I guess prisoners received mail. I think it was part of, like, the setup. I'm there for 6 days, but they censored the mail, and they actually figured out, like, going through his mail, that he volunteered for the study in order to expose the study, and he actually, like, he mistakenly thought this was an establishment tool in ways to control student radicals. So this guy thought it was something way bigger than it even was.
So this was just like a psychology study.
Yeah.
Which very rapidly worked.
Yeah. And he
thought it was like this almost like a conspiracy.
Yes,
yeah.
Basically.
Okay.
And he was going to sell it to newspapers and all this stuff. And yeah. So there's all that. And now we're going to go into some grievances. So this is one. More things started happening, I guess. So less than 36 hours into the experiment, prisoner 8612 began to just, like, freak out. He had acute emotional disturbances, disorganized thinking, uncontrollable crying, and rage. And they thought he was just messing with them. They're like, he's just trying to get out of this, blah, blah, blah. And so when the prisoner... I don't know, primary prison consultant, I'm not sure exactly who that is. That's not made clear. But they interviewed him, and they, like, were like, you're so weak, and, like, if you continue this is what's going to happen to you, and, like, all this stuff. And I guess what they told him was going to happen to him was what would happen in San Quentin prison. And he was giving the offer of becoming an informant in exchange for no further guard harassment. So during the next count... he told the other prisoners, you can't leave, you can't quit. Like that prisoner 8612 told the other ones. Mm-hmm. And so it like heightened their sense of really being imprisoned. And then he just became that crazy, scream, curse, go into a rage that was out of control. And then they were finally like, okay, no, yeah, this guy's going crazy. We need to let him go. So the next day, so I think this is like day 3. I think, they had a visiting hour for friends and family. So during this time, they, like, cleaned up the jail, made it look super nice. We're like, oh, no, this isn't so bad. They're not struggling or anything like that. And they washed, shaved, and groomed the prisoners, gave them a really big food, had music playing, all this stuff. I mean, they kept them in their outfits, obviously, because they couldn't change them. Yeah, but, okay, so this is just crazy. I'm going to read this.
Okay.
So the visitors had to register. They were made to wait a half hour. We're told that only 2 visitors could see any one prisoner, were limited to only 10 minutes of visiting time, and had to be under the surveillance of a guard during the visit. Before any parents could enter the visiting area, they also had to discuss their son's case with the warden. Of course, parents complained about these arbitrary rules, but remarkably, they complied with them, and so they too became a bit of players in our prison drama. Isn't that crazy? So some of them got upset because they saw, like, how, like, tired and, like, upset the prisoners or their children were. And so, like, they appealed privately to the superintendent, the, like, person in that role, and just talking to them. And then the the superintendent responded by, like, shifting the blame from the situation to her son. Like, he would ask, like, well, what's wrong with him? Doesn't he not sleep well? Like,
oh,
changing it then, like, can he not handle this? And then, of course, like, the macho dad of the 70s is like, he's a tough kid, he can handle this.
right.
Okay.
Man up.
So the next point is about this massive escape plot, and that was the next major event. And it wasn't, like, it was just a rumor. So it was a rumor that prisoner 8612, the one who was discharged, that he was going to round up a bunch of his friends and try to break in and free everybody else. They, like, even... the professor who wrote this website, I'm going to look up his name so I can get it right, Zimbardo, he said, like, they definitely handled this wrong. Like, he's like, even we conducting the study, because he was I think he was acting as, like, the superintendent of the prison. One of the other people were supposed to be the warden, like, one of his graduate assistants.
Okay.
And so he's like, even we got way too into this. And this is, like, the thing that shows it, because instead of being like, oh, we should trace how this rumor developed, and we should see where this is coming from and all this stuff. But instead of that, they decided to put an informant into the cell that 8612 had occupied, which was supposed to tell them about the escape plot. And then the Zimbardo went to the actual Palo Alto Police Department and asked them if they could borrow one of their cells to take their prisoners there while the supposedly jailbreak was supposed to happen, so they wouldn't be there. Obviously, it was turned down. And then they decided to just cuff all of the prisoners together, like, put bags over their heads, and they just took them to another floor of the building to wait it out so that once the 8612 and all these people came in to the prison, everyone would be gone, and then Zimbardo could be like, yeah, the experiment's over, we let them all go, basically.
So did 8612 actually come in?
Nope. No one came in.
So he had people bagged and handcuffed upstairs, and no one came in?
Yep.
Okay, Zimbardo. Rude.
Yep. Okay, and he actually says this too. He says, to my surprise, I got really angry at them. Here I had a prison break on my hands. The security of my men and the stability of my prison was at stake, and now I had to deal with this bleeding heart liberal academic effete ding-dong who was concerned about the independent variable. Oh yeah, so someone asked him, they're like was it basically called him out for getting too involved, and like, what's your independent variable? And then this is how he reacted. And then he said, it wasn't until much later I realized how far into my prison role I was at that point. That I was thinking like a prison superintendent rather than a research psychologist.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So just having the rumor of the prison break, even though it was just a rumor, they were punished for it. So some of them are like, well, not necessarily punished, but they tried to like, it was like the rebellion where the guards like, well, we're going to up it. We're just going to be more aggressive to them and everything like that. So they did that again. And some of them, they had made them clean toilets with their bare hands, like with no sponges, stuff like that, made them do a bunch of like push-ups, jumping jacks, and increased it so they would do it for hours on end, like sit on their backs during push-ups, stuff like that. The next thing that happened was, I can't pronounce this word, they brought in a Catholic priest who was a prison chaplain. And so his role was to act just like he would in a prison and basically... Okay, so they say the result was truly Kafkaesque. I don't know what that word is. I've never heard it before, but I'm going to throw it in there because it's the title of this section. So the chaplain would interview each prisoner individually, and then he would talk to them, call them by their number. Or, no, they asked to introduce themselves, and they would call themselves by their number rather than their name. At least most of them did. And then they would just do some small talk, and then the chaplain would say, son, what are you doing to get out of here? And then the prisoner would respond with puzzlement, and then the chaplain explained that the only way to get out of prison was with the help of the lawyer. And so then, like, it was just kind of solidifying this role more. So there was one prisoner who didn't want to speak to the priest, and that was prisoner 819, who was feeling sick, refused to eat, and wanted to see a doctor instead of a priest. And eventually he was persuaded to go and talk to the priest and superintendent, and just so they could kind of gauge what kind of doctor he needed. And when he came out, he broke down, began to cry hysterically. And so Zimbardo took the chain off his foot, the cap off his head, and told him to go and rest in a room that was adjacent to the prison yard. So he's like, go and take a break. And he said he would get him some food, take him to see a doctor, all this stuff. While he was in this other room, the guards lined up the prisoners and made the prisoners chant, prisoner 819 is a bad prisoner because of what prisoner 819 did. My cell is a mess, Mr. Correctional Officer. They had to shout that statement in unison multiple times. And so Zimbardo realized that 819 could hear the chanting. So when he went back to the room, that guy was just like a mess, sobbing uncontrollably, freaking out. And then the chanting just changed into 819 is bad. So that's all they were saying over and over and over again. So Zimbardo suggested they leave, but 819 refused. And he said he could not leave because the others had labeled him a bad prisoner. And then even though he was feeling sick, he wanted to go back and prove that he was not a bad prisoner.
Wow.
And then at that point, Zimbardo told him, he said, listen, you are not 819. And so he's like, your name is this, and my name is Dr. Zimbardo, and I am a psychologist, not a prison superintendent, and this is not a real prison. This is just an experiment, and those are students, not prisoners, just like you. Let's go. And then he stopped crying. He looked up like he just woke up from a nightmare. He's like, okay. And then he left. So the next day, all prisoners who had thought they were grounds for parole were chained together, and they were brought to a parole board, which was composed of just like other professors in the department. Mm-hmm. During those hearings, they asked the prisoners whether they would forfeit the money that they were making, which was $15 a day, if they were to parole them, and they said yes. Almost all of them said yes, that they would give it up just to like get out. And then when they ended the hearings and telling the prisoners to go back to their cells while we considered their request, every prisoner obeyed, even though they could have obtained the same result simply by quitting the experiment. So they could have left then, but they didn't.
Did they know?
I don't know. That's never made clear if they knew, because like nowadays in psychological studies, like it's like in like when they sign up for, you have to tell them you can leave at any time. And
right.
You can, and this is probably part of the reason why those rules are in place. And, you know, this is completely voluntary.
Right.
All this stuff. So, I mean, they may have not explicitly told them it, but that was an option to them. But I think at that point, like, it wasn't even something that was going through their head. Mm-hmm. Back to the prison consultant person that I said before, I don't know who it was, but he adopted the role of head of the parole board, and he became the most hated authoritarian official imaginable. So much that even he was sick over what he'd becoming. Like, he was like, I don't... Oh, okay. So this guy was a prisoner for 16 years. So that's why he was the prison consultant. So he was the guy who had been in there, and he was saying everything. So yeah, they had different types of guards during this time. They said about a third of them were actually like good guys who really didn't like anything. They would try to help. They did little favors for the prisoners, never punished them. There were the tough but fair guards who followed the rules but didn't go over the top. And then the last third were guards who were hostile, arbitrary, and inventive in their forms of prison humiliation. And those guys appeared to just be enjoying the power that they wielded. So in one final act of rebellion, prisoner 416, who was newly admitted as a standby prisoner, so he came in, like, okay, so at the beginning of the study, they were still trying to find their, like, place. So you know how the guards weren't super harsh at first, and then they gradually increased that and all that stuff. So this guy comes in like, the full heat of it. Like, this is already hell, all this stuff. And all the prisoners who had been there told him that quitting wasn't possible and that it was a real prison. And so he immediately was like, I'm going to go on a hunger strike. So he went on a hunger strike, and the guards tried to get him to eat, and that didn't work. So they threw him into solitary confinement for 3 hours, even though their own rules that they said it was only going to be at max an hour. And he still refused to eat. And the other prisoners saw him as a troublemaker. Like, they actually, like, hated him because he was just causing issues. And they're like, why doesn't he just follow the rules and all this stuff? So the guards made a deal, and they gave the prisoners this choice that they said 416 could come out of solitary if they were all willing to give up their blanket, or they could leave 416 in solitary all night. And only one person elected to give up the blanket, and all the other ones wanted to keep it.
I feel like a hunger strike is pretty dramatic. Like, he just gets there, learns that it's a shit show, and is like, I'm just gonna not eat.
There you go.
Like, that'll show him. No, that'll make you hungry.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't understand.
Well, they were probably like, well, they obviously have to feed me, and you can't let me starve because this isn't a real prison. And, I mean, even a real prison. I think it's like his way of getting out of it. Like, when they're like, there's no way out. He's like, well, this is a way out.
Yeah, I'll just starve myself.
So on the fifth night, some visiting parents asked Zimbardo. I can't remember his name. Zimbardo, I think.
Zimbardo, yeah.
They asked him to contact a lawyer in order to get their son out of prison. They said a Catholic priest had to tell them they should get a lawyer or a public defender. So it was that priest who came and talked to them if they wanted to bail their son out. I called the lawyer as requested, and he came the next day to interview the prisoners with a standard set of legal questions, even though he, too, knew it was an experiment. So this is all just, like, it was just so serious. It's so crazy to me. So at that point, they knew they had to end the study because there was just so much happening with prisoners withdrawing and behaving in, like, pathological ways, and the guards were just becoming sadistic. And the good guards couldn't even intervene because they were outnumbered and all this stuff. And also, they noted that no guard ever came in late, called in sick, left early, or demanded extra pay for overtime work. Yeah. So they ended the study early for 2 reasons. One big one was that the videotapes, they learned that, like, they had videotapes running all the time, but the guards didn't know that. They thought they turned them off at night. So they would see, like, really, really bad degrading abuse during the night when they thought the cameras were off. And the second one was that he had brought in Christina Maslach, who was a recent Stanford PhD, and she was supposed to conduct interviews with the guards and prisoners and just to kind of, like, see where they were at psychologically. And as soon as she saw it, she was like, this needs to be done. Like, this is terrible. This is horrible. And she was the only one who ever questioned the morality of the experiment, apparently.
I was going to say, where were these people and why didn't they have them on board the whole time?
Right? I mean, like, it was the first woman who came in to see prison. So I'm just going to say that. So, yeah, on the last day, they just talked with everybody, with the guards and then the prisoners and then them all together just to kind of, like, debrief and be like, okay, we're going to transition ourselves back into the real world, and you guys aren't guards and you aren't prisoners and you're all on an equal playing field, and just stop, like, all this stuff. And then the person 416 in the interview, he said, like, even after he'd been there for, like, a day, I began to feel like I was losing my identity, that the person I called Clay, the person who put me in this place, the person who volunteered to go into this prison because it was a prison to me, it is still a prison to me. I don't regard it as an experiment or a simulation because it was a prison run by psychologists instead of run by the state. I began to feel that identity, the person that I was, had decided to go to prison, was distant from me. It was remote until I finally wasn't that. I was 416. I was really my number. Then one of the person who was in prison for a long time who they talked to about the experiment, he kind of said a similar thing. Like, he was put in solitary confinement for 37 months when he was in prison. And he said, like, it didn't change anything. It actually made me want to kill. And he's like, I went in there for theft. He's like, I left there wanting to kill every single person who did that to me and who treated me that way and all this stuff. And so I was like, oh, that's really bad.
This is bad.
So that's basically it. Just some other stuff is that a lot of what this was because of they wanted to look at military prisons, and that was, like, their goal, is because they said there was just a lot of stuff happening at military prisons, and actually, like, in the next day or, like, weeks following the end of the study, there was an alleged escape at San Quentin, and there was riots at Attica Prison in New York, and they were, like, where guards were taken hostage by the prisoners because the prisoners were demanding to be better treated and all this stuff like that. And so that was basically the Stanford Prison Experiment, and I hope you learned a lot.
So I have questions.
Yeah, that was a lot of information.
Number one, what was the guy's intention behind, like, what did he want to figure out?
So he wanted to figure out, we wanted to see what the psychological effects were of becoming a prisoner or a prison guard.
No,
that's
very cut and dry. Okay.
There is a more detailed. It was focused on the power of roles, rules, symbols, group identity, and situational validation of behavior that generally would repulse ordinary individuals. Okay. So have you heard of the Milgram experiment?
No.
Okay. So it's compared to it a lot. It's similar. The Milgram experiment, the goal of that was to basically see, because a lot of the Nazis who were involved, afterwards they were like, well, I didn't want to do it. I did it because, like, I was kind of forced to run these experiments. Right. And it was kind of studying that. Like, it was saying, like, when you have an authority figure over you, how much more are you willing to do? And so the Milgram experiment would have somebody there were 2 people. One person was in a room. The person outside of the room had a control board.
For, like, pain, right?
Yeah, it was to shock them. Yeah.
But they weren't actually getting shocked.
Right.
It just made it sound like they were getting shocked.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And so even when they were like, stop, my heart, I have a heart condition. I'm like, this is hurting me. And the researcher who was in the room with them would be like, increase it. And so they would, and like most of the time they would increase it. And then sometimes like the person in the other room would go silent. So, and it was like giving them so much like shock they would have been dead.
Right.
And they still kept increasing it. And like it like ended up like traumatizing those people. And so it's a lot of the same thing as like when you put people in these roles in certain situations with people like just societal roles with expectations and power, I think is a big one too.
Yeah.
And it's like who has the power in that situation? Like prisoners don't have the power, the guards have the power. Or in the Milgram experiment, it's like the researcher has the power. So you have to listen to them. So
I'm curious so I know they did like debriefing afterward, but did any of these people end up in counseling because
well, like
These people.
it wasn't said on the website, which I'm not surprised about considering it's biased.
because I feel like I would need
sure.
some major like therapeutic intervention after having to
Like, I just
poop in a
imagine them
bucket.
sitting there. Like, I mean, it was only 6 days, but imagine them sitting there afterwards, like, in the debriefing. And it's, like, having to be in the same room as them. And, like, there's no way you're going to quickly accept, like, okay, yeah, no, we're good now. This is fine. This is over.
Well, it's almost like self and group like brainwash, right? So
Yeah.
like they made their purpose was to convince you that you were this prisoner and that you were a guard. And now just flick the lights on. No, that's not happening anymore. No, that's not. Your brain isn't going to flick off that fast.
Yeah.
Even the guy, 906 or whatever, the one who left.
Oh, like 8, 6, 1, 2, or whatever. Yeah.
No, not that one. The one who got put in the room to take a break.
Oh, yeah. I don't remember his number, but yeah.
So, like, how did the professor just be like,
hey, remember, you are in the psychology department. This is not a prison. And then he just was like, oh, you're right. Okay.
like, to me, that sounds just like almost like coming out of hypnosis. Like, you snap your fingers and you're just like, oh, you're right. No, life is fine. And then you just go on your merry way. Like,
No.
I don't know. I'm curious, John, if this sounds like boot camp.
I did think that. In my head, I was like, oh, yeah, this sounds like boot camp. Yeah, a lot.
But, like, also, boot camp is probably a little more controlled.
I was just going to say,
Definitely
there's
controlled.
structure there. Like, I think one thing that made this, like, especially bad was there wasn't any structure. The guards could do whatever they want. They could make whatever rules they wanted. And so it's like rules were like,
Yeah.
they had their established rules, but then they're also creating more rules and changing their rules and not even following their own rules. So it was like, I think the unpredictability of the guards, too, was terrifying for the prisoners. Because it's not even anymore. It's like, if I do this, I expect to do this. It's like, that's not the thing anymore.
Right. Well, and it's like, because my next question was, why doesn't it happen that fast in prisons? But I think you just answered that. Like, the guards had their rules were you couldn't physically harm.
Yeah.
And also the creativity of the guards. Okay, like, I know 6 days nonstop is a lot of time to, like, think about how to torture a person, but, like, they did that real quick. Like, I don't know. It's scary.
It is scary.
It's so
It's really
scary.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because, like, a lot of it, like, when I looked at the Wikipedia page for it, yeah, they're like, you may see this in a psych, like, 101 classroom, but they kind of don't really talk about it anymore because the experimental, like, the results, you can't get anything from the results. And I'm like, yes, that's true, but at the same time, it shows, like, such bad ethics. Like, it's like, don't do this.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well,
So I feel like that's why it should be talked about as far as research studies.
I literally was just thinking about this the other day between this experiment and the one that you just mentioned with the
Milgram.
Yeah, the Milgram experiment. If if those didn't happen, ethics wouldn't have ever, like, developed, or it would have developed a lot later. And, like, unfortunately, we wouldn't have a lot of information that we have today. So while it's really poopy that this happened, part of me is like, well, we just learned a lot from that. We learned a lot of what not to do. Would I do it again? No, obviously not. But I feel like we need to know about these things, even though they were complete crapshoots.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the Milgram one was looking at, like, what the Nazis did, and this one is looking at, like, prisons in general. Like, the guard and prisoner relationship. And a lot of it was just being, like, I mean, nowadays, kind of like what you said, Katie, it's like we can have these experiments now that are controlled and ethical and all these things, but at the same time, we're not going to get these results because we can't simulate these things. And the only thing that we can look at is history. Is like, well, let's look at the history of prisons in general and all this stuff. And it's like, well, this is saying that, like, yeah, well, this is supposedly going on, but we can't know for sure if this is supposedly going on until we tested in controlled experiment, even though this wasn't a controlled experiment.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. You can't even test some things now.
No.
Which I'm happy about. Let me just clarify that for the listeners. Ethics are good.
I mean, I've dealt with an IRB board multiple times, so it's annoying, but it's important.
But it's important. Yes.
It is very important.
Agreed.
Yeah. There's also a movie that came out in 2015, by the way.
About it? Really? What's the movie called?
Like the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Oh. Spoiler alert.
It was like a recreation of it, but I think, I don't know, I watched the trailer earlier. It kind of makes it seem like the people, the participants picked whether they wanted to be a prisoner or a guard, which is very not what they did, and it's terrible practice.
Oh my gosh.
I had no idea it would turn out this way.
Yep, definitely reminds me of boot camp.
Isn't that crazy?
Being quiet at
like-
all times, getting beat, aka push-ups, sit-ups, whatever it is.
You did not get beat.
That's what
in
we call
boot camp.
it. It's called getting beat. That's why I had to say AKA, because no one else would. They would actually think we're getting beat.
Yeah, like, it's like you hear about it, and then you watch that, and it actually kind of, like, puts it, like, makes you, like, see it. Like, hearing about it is one thing, but, like, when you see it, and you can, like,
You kind of
feel
put
it.
yourself in that position.
Yeah. It, like,
intense.
made me feel icky.
Yeah.
Like, ickier than just reading about it and listening about it.
It's super disturbing. Super disturbing.
Those actors, just from that trailer, did a really good job. Like, oh my gosh. Like, wow.
Okay.
Guess what we're going to watch when we get home?
Maybe during daylight. Like, I feel like, I mean, it's not a scare. Like,
Again, you
I
just
feel
put
like
that yourself
it's
in
a
that role.
psychological thriller.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay. Do you guys have anything else to add?
I do not.
No, it was very interesting.
Yeah.
Learned something new. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're good, I think.
Okay. I'm going to put pictures from the study on our Instagram, which is at HMCT Podcast. You can also follow on Twitter at Podcast HMCT, or go to our website for show notes and bonus content, historiesmysteriesconspiracies.com, and you can email with anything else, which is at hmctpodcast@gmail.com. And that's everything. So, be your weird self. Bye.
Bye.